I had been thinking for years about a story about a shark that attacks people and what would happen if it came in and wouldn't go away, and I hadn't done anything with it really. And then in 1964, I read a story about a shark fisherman off Long Island who caught a 4,550-pound great white shark off the beaches of Long Island. And I thought, wow, what would happen if one of these things came in and wouldn't go away? And again, I didn't do anything about it until 1970 or 71, when a publisher finally said, that's an interesting story. I'll pay you a couple of dollars if you'll put it on paper. So that's how the idea began. One of the many accidents that happened with Jaws was the title. We had no idea of the title. I had thought for months about titles. I probably had 100. There were some of them were pretentious: A Stillness in the Water, A Silence in the Deep, Leviathan Rising. A lot of them were Françoise Sagan titles, terribly pretentious and very personal. There were the Jaws of Death and the Jaws of Leviathan, and they all sounded dramatic or melodramatic or weird or pretentious. And we came up to 20 minutes before production, and my editor and I were having lunch at a restaurant called the Dallas Cowboy in New York. And I said to him, look, this was Tom Congdon, we cannot agree on a word that we like, let alone a title that we like. In fact, the only word that we even think means anything, that says anything, is Jaws. Call the book Jaws. And he said, what does it mean? I said, I don't know, but it's short, it fits on a jacket, and it may work. He said, okay, we'll call the thing Jaws. At first, nobody knew what they had here, including myself. It was a first novel. It was a first novel about a fish, and it really had no great prospects. But Tom Congdon, the editor at Doubleday, sensed that there was more here than just a first novel or a first novel about a fish. So it was sent out to the Book of the Month Club and the Literary Guild and Bantam and other paperback houses. And the first response was from the Book of the Month Club, which made it an A book, which means that it is selected for a main selection, or it is in the running for a main selection. And suddenly people began to think, whoops, we may have something more here than just a first novel, which nobody will read, and a first novel about a fish, which who cares less. So then the Reader's Digest selected it as a selection, and the Book of the Month Club made it an A book, main selection, and then Bantam bought it for what was then an enormous sum of money, $575,000. And then it went out to the movie auctions. And in those days, we're now talking many, many, many years ago, it went to Zanuck and Brown at Universal for $150,000. Which was, to me, the moon. I had no money at all. I had, in the bank, $300.
Both Dick Zanuck and I saw or heard about the book at identical times. I heard about it from a small card in the fiction department of Cosmopolitan, edited by my wife, Helen Gurley Brown, which gave a brief description of the plot of this novel by Peter Benchley, and then said, might make a good movie.
We both read it overnight, got on the phone with each other the next morning and said, look, we don't know how we can possibly do it, but we decided we must have this. Whatever it takes, this is the most exciting thing we've ever read, and we'll figure out later how we can make it.
Had we read it twice, in my opinion, we never would have made Jaws, because anybody with a modicum of production knowledge would know there was no way to get a shark to leap on the stern of a small boat and swallow a man. How are we going to do this? Were we going to do it in animation? Who was going to do this? We never thought about it. We just loved the book. We thought it would make a very good movie.
And the deal was subject to a meeting with Mr. Benchley, who we'd never met before, actually. And the agency also very much wanted us to tie a director of theirs, one of their clients, into this whole package. And so we had agreed to, I'm not going to mention this person's name because this is not a flattering story, but we had agreed in our anxiety to secure the rights to the book to put on this person as a director.
There was a director, and I really don't remember who it was, who kept saying, I've always wanted to make a movie about a whale. and at the end of it, Zanuck said, that's the end of that.
When the director who was going to direct a whale was vanquished from our sight, and here was Steven Spielberg, director, filmmaker, Sugarland Express, right within sight of us. Stephen actually, and there are many versions of this, Stephen will tell you his, probably the true one.
I just remember seeing a very large, a block of pages that said Jaws on it, and I didn't know what that meant. Was it Jaws? Was it like about a dentist? Was this, was it because Jaws did not have it was not in the national consciousness at the time. It was just a word. It was kind of an unusual word, and I remember borrowing a copy to read over the weekend and discovering, with completely uninformed, not knowing, that it was a book about a great white shark, a predator, off a beach in a kind of, Cape Cod-esque town. I had no idea this was about to become one of the best-selling books in the nation. And I read it, and I suddenly said to myself, wow, this is just like a movie I just made about a truck and a hapless driver called Duel. And of course, I'm young and I'm stupid and I'm saying, Duel, gee, that has 4 words. Duel has 4 letters and Jaws has 4 letters. And they're both about these leviathans preying upon every man, and I saw such a comparison between the Duel, which I had done previous to Sugarland Express, and Jaws, and I said to myself, this is kind of the sequel to Duel, only it's on the water. And I got very interested in it, and because coincidentally the producers of Jaws had just been my producers on my first feature, Sugarland Express, Dick Zanuck and David Brown, I asked them if this was something I could direct next.
The first thing Dick Zanuck and David Brown said to me is, we want to get rid of the backstories. We want to make this an A to Z adventure story. We do not want to have any of that involvement with a romance between Hooper and Mrs. Brody. We don't want to talk about the mafia. We don't want to talk about anything like that. We want to make this a straight line adventure story.
Peter Benchley did a very good adaptation of his own novel. And then Peter kind of turned it over to me and said, here it is, and do with it what you want. And at that point, I didn't quite know what to do with it because it wasn't the movie I wanted to make next. And I quite didn't know the movie I wanted to make from the novel Jaws, except I knew about the 3rd act, and I knew about the 1st act. I just didn't know about the 2nd act, which was going to be about a 60-page 2nd act. And David Brown suggested, and Dick Zanuck both suggested, that I go to Howard Sackler, who had written The Great White Hope.
We went from Peter Benchley to a writer by the name of Howard Sackler, who was a Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright who wrote The Great White Hope. And he had been working on something else for us. And he also was an expert scuba diver and scuba dived all around the world, was very familiar, as is Benchley, by the way, great diver, very familiar with sharks and underwater activity.
Howard Sackler specifically asked not to have credit. He only had a limited time to give to the film, and therefore he said, I don't want credit. But he was, I think Spielberg would say he was very important in that terrible phrase of motion picture making. He broke the back of the story.
Sackler really broke the back of the movie and got me to say, yes, I'll make this movie next. I'm committing.
And then came something that's not been recorded in the history of Jaws. The Screen Actors Guild contract was about to expire at the end of June of that year. It could have been 1973, perhaps, whenever the year was. And the studio decreed that no movie would be started that could not be finished by June 30th of that year, because they didn't want to be struck. That is, that photography was completed. Steven Spielberg, Richard Zanuck, and I met at the Bel Air Hotel, and Steven said, I don't have a script yet. You're asking me to start this movie in April, whenever it was. I don't know, maybe this was February. He said, I don't have a script. And I said, who can we get? He said, there's a man named Carl Gottlieb. I'm thinking about him in the movie.
I was hired first as an actor because if I was going to be on the set, I could at least help in the improvisations and the crowd scenes and finding stuff to do in the moment, which had been my job on stage at the committee as an improviser. And in fact, some of the best lines in the film are improvised by the actors. based on their characters in the script. When you do a straight line adventure film like Jaws, anything that doesn't contribute to the suspense or the humanity or the horror has to go. I said that we have a chance to make a movie that's going to do for the ocean what the shower scene did to Psycho in terms of affecting a generation with kind of a fear of the water. And to this day, when people come up to me and learn that I've worked on the screenplay of Jaws and talk to me about it, inevitably the first thing they say is, that whole summer I didn't go swimming, or I've been afraid of the water ever since that movie, or I'm always thinking of sharks when I go swimming. In Hawaii, I don't go swimming at all. I hear that to this day. So surprisingly enough, that was my first reaction to the script and the story, and it's the thing that appears to have carried through and is one of the overwhelming impressions that we made. It's become popular culture.
I wanted to introduce Quint, not in his boat laughing at all the yahoos on shore, and that one little visual where the orca goes by with Quint laughing and chuckling at the tiger shark that obviously isn't the predator that's been killing all the people in the vicinity. I had this other thing that I'd written in my script, because as you recall, I wrote an entire script of Jaws after Benchley and before Sackler, and this was one of the scenes that I had written, that Robert Shaw, or that Quint, is in a movie theater watching Moby Dick on the island of Amity at the local movie house, and he's laughing all the way through it. He can't stop laughing. It's so silly, the mechanical white whale, Ahab with his big harpoon, stabbing the whale as he's lashed to the belly, and the whale sounding and coming up again, and he's still, this little mechanical figure is, still sticking the little mechanical harpoon in the whale. And I just had Quint laughing hysterically, laughing so hard and so sort of maliciously that people get up and start leaving the theater until he's all alone in the theater, and his laughter can be heard right down the street. And that was in my script. But in trying to get the rights to Moby Dick, which Gregory Peck controlled, Greg wasn't opposed to the use of that scene that way in Jaws. He just claimed that he wasn't really proud of Moby Dick. It was not the proudest moment, in his body of work, and just didn't really want us to either make fun of it or just include it at all in the movie, so we could never get the rights to use Moby Dick. I had this idea that there's a harbor master, and he's in his little shack, and there's all these sailboats. It's night, and there's about 20 sailboats with just their masts sticking up. One mast starts to go like this. And then the ship next to it, that mast goes like this. And then the third mast goes like this, and the fourth, until all of a sudden you see in sequential order, something is traveling beneath the keels. As the harbor master goes down to clean out his coffee pot in the harbor, and as he gets down there to clean out his coffee pot, he, of course, is taken by the shark. And that was a scene that was in my original script. In its place, I wrote this other scene, which was also in my original script, that slid over to this one, which is the pier. The two fishermen who take the Sunday pot roast and a huge chain and a large Texas Chainsaw Massacre style hook and toss it into the current. The tide takes it out, and of course the shark takes the bait, and the pier comes right off. The guy comes off the pier. The reason I wanted the scene in the movie was for one shot. Not seeing the shark was important to me because it was scarier, in my opinion, seeing the pier going off, stopping, and turning, and the pier itself coming back for the swimmer.
I've heard that Stephen wanted to have the old couple from Sugarland Express, whose car was stolen, turn up in their car in Amity.
I wanted them to be passing through Amity, maybe even going out to the beach and spreading out a picnic blanket, even fantasizing and saying, perhaps Mr. Knocker blows up an inner tube, and we get the idea that maybe he's going to go out in the water with his wife. And I thought, this movie's too hard to make. I've got to stop making it harder on myself.
When it came down to where we would shoot this film, we sent Joe Alves, our production designer, out with the team to give us some ideas and some photographs and pictures of where this town should be shot, and including Jamaica. We thought of Jamaica primarily because of the clarity of the water. We could do underwater work down there and do it all there. And one of the places obviously, that they went, among others, was the island of Martha's Vineyard, which, believe it or not, had never been photographed by a feature film before. They had very strict rules and regulations there, and had always kept movie companies in. So it really was a question of talking them into letting, at the height of their season, letting a big movie company come in there.
Martha's Vineyard did present the problem that this pristine place, unchanged since, the 18th century, didn't particularly care for a movie invasion. They didn't like to see an artificial shark parked in a channel where their homes faced it. And the only set that we built, which was Quent's shack, we had to post a bond with the town authorities that everything would be placed exactly the way it was.
The billboard in the picture, where they put up a billboard and some kids have come along and made a prank out of it. He painted in the shark and help and so forth. We had to put up that billboard one morning, shoot the scene, and take it down at the end of the day.
The real attraction of Martha's Vineyard you couldn't see with the naked eye. It was the fact it was the only place on the East Coast where I could go 12 miles out to sea and still have a sandy bottom only 30 feet below the surface of the water, where we could put the shark's sled and where the mechanical shark could function. So Martha's Vineyard was chosen less because it was a very picturesque village. I could have shot this movie in Sag Harbor or Montauk or a number of places. It was because of that sandy bottom, 12 miles offshore. It was very important that no matter what direction my cameras turned, I didn't want to see land. I felt, my fear was, the minute the audience saw land, they'd say, look, this is getting pretty intense out here. Just turn the boat around and go toward that land that we keep seeing in your movie. I wanted the audience to feel very cut off, like they couldn't just run back to shore because there was no shore to run back to.
I started doing stunt work, and I specialized in water, so a lot of times when the water stunts would come up, I got into doing the water stunts also. Steven Spielberg was a little bit leery having me because I wasn't an actress per se. After the first day of shooting, we did the beach scene the first day, the party scene at night, and we got along wonderful after that. So whatever I did, he liked, and it was great. He was a great person to work for.
I thought that what could really be scary was not seeing the shark and just seeing the water, because we all are familiar with the water. Very few of us have been in the water with a shark. But we've all gone swimming. And the idea of this girl going swimming and the audience going swimming with her would have been too extraordinary if, like a leviathan, the shark had come out of the water with its jaws agape and come down on her, and it would have been a spectacular opening for the film, but there would have been nothing primal about it. It would just have been a monster moment that we've all seen. And I really wanted to do it without seeing the shark in that case, and I wanted the violent jerking motions to just start to trigger our imaginations into either thinking about what's happening below the surface of the waterline or blocking what was happening below the surface.
The first jerk down, Steven did. He had a cable that came to the front of my stomach and went to a anchor that was laying on the bottom of the ocean. And then he just sat, and when he wanted that pull, he just would pull. And I could feel him pulling down, and I just throw my head back even more. They wanted to put me on an electric winch, and I prefer not to use an electric winch, because if any of the line overrode and came to a stop, I might not know it, and I might not be able to get out of it. And being they're pulling me back and forth in the water, I wanted to have more control, so we used manpower. They put cut-off levis on and had cables running from me out to the side to 2 pilings, and then all the way into the beach. And what they would do is we put marks on the beach, and the guys, we'd have 5 or 6 guys on each line, and they would run back and forth from mark to mark. So I didn't have the hard work to do. I just kind of sat there and got pulled around. The guys were running back and forth on the beach. And that's what made my body move back and forth in the frame. And then when I would feel my hips getting pulled the opposite way, I'd just throw my arms out of water very violently the opposite way. So physically, I could make it look more violent than what it was. I went to a marine store and bought like a safety hook that you'd use on a sail, on the halyard of a sail. And I put it onto all the cables that they hooked to me. so that at any time during the scene, if I got in trouble, if I got water, if I got hurt, God knows what happened, I could pull one of those strings and I was free and clear and could come to the surface. So what it was it allowed me, if I got in a spot, to free myself. Because how would anybody know if I was hurt or I needed anything? I'm out there screaming like a fool.
Well, I came to visit Stephen, or I came to do my own looping. I'm not really sure now. It was so long ago. And I walked in, and Stephen had this beautiful girl's blonde head reared back like this, and he was pouring water down her throat like this. I'm telling her to scream her bloody lungs out, which I thought was a rather interesting way to spend the afternoon, but not particularly comfortable for her. But it does work for the movie. I mean, the reason they were doing it was to make the appropriate sound, and they couldn't do it any other way, so he just poured that water down her throat.
Well, the problem was they brought the hand to me, and they said, "Here's the dead girl's hand." And I said, "Wow, it looks like shiny plastic. It looks fake." And they said, "Well, you know, after a body's been decomposing for a day on the sand with the sun coming down, that it sort of takes on that look." I said, "Well, you might be clinically right, you know, and a pathologist might certainly look at that and admire that moment in Jaws. But to me, as an audience member, it looks fake. It looks like plastic." And we tried to powder it. I remember putting powder on it to get the reflective shine off it. We couldn't do that. So I just sort of said, well, screw it. And I believe I turned to someone and said, "Let me use your arm." And I, kind of like we do when we're kids, we bury our parents in the sand. I kind of buried her in the sand and just had her hand sticking out. And we made up part of the arm so it seemed right up here, it looked like it had been bitten off in a kind of a subtle way. And then there were these little sand crabs that we had collected and put all over the arm, and they were kind of lethargic in their movements. To this day when I see Jaws, I always have this different vision of 10 times as many crabs moving 10 times as fast, trying to feed on the arm. And I later was able to do that in a Temple of Doom, when I was able to get the bugs to do what the crabs couldn't do, 15 years earlier. The death of the Kintner boy and all the paranoia and the tension and the suspense leading up to the actual attack when he's out on the raft, I, in my mind, wanted to do in one shot. And in trying to figure out, in a perfect world, how could I have done that in one sustained shot, I came up with the idea to have bathers with different colored bathing suits walking in front of the camera that would wipe off Roy Scheider, and the same color in the reverse, moving in certainly the other direction, would wipe on what he's looking at, which, even though it wouldn't be one shot, would give more of a seamless feeling and much more of a clear point of view, that you knew who was looking at who, that all this must be from the police chief's point of view. The scene's about him. It's about his reaction. It's not about the Kintner boy being killed. It's about the chief of police, his fear of the water, his chief responsibility to protect the public, his fear that there is a shark out there, and he knows it's out there. Craig Kingsbury was a local on Martha's Vineyard, and he was quite a character. He himself was a movie and a book. And, had I not gotten Robert Shaw and had I met him in an open casting call, I might have come very close to flirting with the idea of using him to play Quint, because he was the purest version of who, in my mind, Quint really was. And when I met him, he just came up with this great dialogue, and I kind of kept increasing his part. And just by meeting him, I said, "I want you to be in my movie, and you can make up your own dialogue." And he made up all that stuff when he's in the boat, and he says, "You're going to wish your mothers never met their fathers when you start, piling into those reefs, boy."
There's no shortage of drunks on the island. Craig Kingsbury had the distinction of being the only guy who was driving under the influence a team of oxen, and was loaded and smashed and driving these cows around.
Just in talking about fishing and sharking and this and that, Craig gave me some great lines. And, one of the lines was, it's not like going out there to get a great right. It's not like going out there to catch bluegills or tomicods. That's Craig's line.
Craig Kingsbury, because he played Ben Gardner, got to have his head life cast for the mold for the severed head that appears in the film.
I was going to be a victim in the estuary. I'm in a boat, in a little rowboat, and the way they shot it the first time, where I'm in the shark's mouth with a blood pack in my mouth, I'm going on top of water, underwater, on top of spitting blood out, and I'm trying to make a lot of movement, but it was very awkward the way this seat was, and I was trying to make a lot of movement like I was in the shark's mouth, going underwater, on top of water. And then I see Roy's son staring at me, and as a last-ditch effort, the shark is heading right towards him, and I just make a move to grab him, and I let him I think I just touched him, and I let him go, and then I go underwater and disappear. Well, what happened in that scene is, it was so violent and so horrendous that they couldn't use it. It was just too violent, period. And I was in this little bucket seat strapped into it, and the shark fin was behind me on a sled. I had the kid in my arms, and I was going to take him underwater, and then I let him go, and then the sled went underwater.
Teddy Grossman is in the jaws of the shark. The shark's underwater, and Teddy, like the maidenhead on a ship, is traveling toward this kid, vomiting blood. That's much more horrible than what I had done, in the first third of Jaws. I just didn't like it. It was too bloody, and I thought it was in bad taste, so I cut it out. I asked Robert to give Lorraine a hard time inside the scene, because he's really sort of putting down Chief Brody. He thinks Chief Brody's a sissy, and he's putting down the fact he's all in rubber. He says, "You're glad you brought your rubbers, Chief," and he's always doing this to everybody, to Brody's character and to Brody and to Hooper. And so I asked him to chide Lorraine, and in the middle of the scene, he made up this little poem that went, there was a woman named Mary who lost her virginity, not a bad record for this vicinity, whatever it was. And when it was all over, I said, you got to help me clear this. If that's from a song, we just can't use that without paying for the rights. He said, no, I don't think we'll be sued because I got it from a tombstone in Ireland. For Jaws, I wanted the color red to be the blood and not to be a bandana around someone's neck or a plaid overshirt or the letters on a boat. The only red I wanted in the movie was blood, and I told the production designer, Joe Alves, at the very beginning, to please, when you're designing the picture and you're finding your colors, don't find red, just allow red to be the blood. And in a sense, I think we pretty much stuck to that. I think that's what happened. We did have red wine, but there's a bit of a symbol. It's a bit symbolic.
When the shooting started at sea, the production got a lot more difficult. That's when they started worrying about wind and weather, when they could spend a day on the ocean and get 6 seconds of usable film because of boats on the horizon, because of malfunctioning shark.
The problems of shooting at sea are enormous because the wind, the waves, everything is moving, and nothing stays the same for more than 50, 60 seconds.
I would set up a shot, and I'd get my camera all set, and all of a sudden the electrical barge would start drifting in a tide that was moving this way, and the camera barge would start drifting this way, and the orca would start moving around on its 2 anchors. And before you knew it, we were all out of position. It took another hour and a half to re-anchor and get set again. And just as we got set, sailboats from a regatta would come in.
You're shooting towards the horizon, right? And the camera has got the horizon. Boop. Then all of a sudden we would see a little sail. And as soon as that sail was in shot, we had to stop and wait till it went all the way across here, which took an hour and a half. And hope that at the end of that hour and a half, another one didn't come. So we were always like, as the sailing ship went off, we were going like, ready, speed, action. No, there's another one. Oh, God damn it. We were always, that put 3 hours a day onto our schedule.
And I'd sit there saying, okay, do I wait here for an hour for the regatta to pass? Or do we turn 18 to 25 anchors, move everything to look in this direction? And we used to do calculations and say, it'll take an hour for the regatta to get from here to here, and an hour and 10 minutes to get all your anchors and look back this way. Let's wait for the sailboats to move out of the shot. And it just was frustrating for all of us.
One of the most remembered and oft-quoted lines in the movie is Roy Scheider saying, "We got to get a bigger boat," which he improvised on the set, and I acknowledge that as a writer. I'm pleased that he said that.
the line, we're going to need a bigger boat, which has become part of the language for people who are faced with an insurmountable problem.
The studio was overloaded with their own effects projects at the time, Hindenburg and Earthquake, and the Marshall Green, the head of production, said, take it and find someone to do it. So I started interviewing various effects people, and I went to Disney's and other, places that do mechanical objects, animals and what have you. And I wasn't having any luck. Everyone was telling me it can't be done, it'd take 3 years in development. And I heard about this guy that had been retired for some time, who did the giant squid in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And his name was Bob Matty. And so when I met Bob, I didn't get the usual pessimistic attitude that you can't do this, you can't make this full, size shark and you shoot it in the real ocean. And instead I got this very enthusiastic, yes, we could do anything. Probably the reason that Stephen and I decided, in a naive sort of way, that we were going to build a full-size shark and shoot the real ocean and not a tank or not a miniature. And maybe that was lack of experience or whatever, but everyone, kept telling us we couldn't do it. So when I found Bob Matty, who actually had made some of these giant creatures, very enthusiastic about it, it was very encouraging. It had to be a formidable, shark. And we made various sketches of 30-foot sharks and 20-foot sharks, and it came up with a reasonable size would be 25 feet. Very, formidable, yet not Moby Dick. And there have been sharks that have been sighted that have been that size, and they've actually caught some that were 21 feet. So it was a credible animal we were making. Doing the initial studies of the great white shark, I went to the Steinhardt, and I borrowed this set of jaws, which was huge. It's about 18, 20-foot shark. We made our shark larger by another 5 or 6 feet, but we kept everything in proportion. The teeth, when I started doing the actual drawings, for the construction of the shark, we used everything in proper proportion, getting the right personnel. It was sort of like, it reminds me of Magnificent Seven, when they're going out and you're picking, 6 great guys, 6 big guns. And we heard of this young man in the plastics section by the name of Roy Arbogast. And he was an expert on rubber forms and new plastics and things like that. So we decided he would be perfect to make the mold. And then there was Richie Helmer and Bill Short, who were excellent in electronics. And we were going to do, all this had to be, electrically activated valves that would work the rams and various things of that night. And we were using hydraulics instead of pneumatics because, we were using pneumatics instead of hydraulics because we didn't want an oil break in the water. So we had to get hydraulic experts too. And then we had Mike and Gary Woods, who were excellent welders. So we assembled this team, and they started on the frame of the shark. So we were working sort of like from the outside in and the inside out. We were separately modeling the shark, and then at the same time they were making the skeleton, and we hoped that they would all fit together. And there was a time element. The time element was this, is that it was already the first of the year in 1974, and we knew we would have a summer window in which to shoot this, especially that we were going to go back east. We decided to shoot this in the area that it was written for, New England. So we had a time element there. And we built the shark and tested the shark dry.
Well, we had a number of different shark components. We had the full shark, which I call the great white turd, which kind of, we pulled along in the water, and it was often on this huge gantry, like a crane arm. And the crane arm was tucked all the way at the 30-foot bottom, you couldn't see the shark. When the crane arm, as quickly as they could blow the ballast and force the arm out of the water, the shark would rise out of the water. The shark could be gimbaled separately on the arm to have an attitude change at the top of the crane arm. We had that. We had just a fin that was pulled through the water, and we had a left to right shark and a right to left shark. And The left or right shark, of course, had no left side. It was all scooped out, and vice versa for the other shark.
Bob needed some area like this that he could get all those hoses and wires and stuff and have access to all the mechanical stuff, you know, whatever needed to be repaired. If we were shooting this one here with the hole here, we could only shoot from the other side. So in this case, this would be the left or right shark.
The shark in Jaws and all subsequent editions is always called Bruce. And the reason he was called Bruce is because Stephen named him that after his lawyer, Bruce Raymer.
That's a much maligned shark, and I'm kind of responsible for creating a lot of the bad mouthing about the shark, because the shark was frustrating. It didn't really work all the time. It didn't work hardly at all.
I remember in particular being on our barge watching the first shark test, at which time the shark simply sank to the bottom of Nantucket Sound, and we felt that our careers in motion pictures had gone with it. Frogmen were delegated to recover it and to bring it back to the surface. Everything that could go wrong with a shark went wrong with the various sharks, the various types, head, fin, tails.
The ocean was so brutal on the mechanics. All the pneumatic tubes, all of that special equipment was being dashed and brutalized by the ocean every day.
There were all these radio mics all over the island, the universal radio mics. So wherever you were on the island, you could hear the radio mics. And they were always saying, the shark is not working, the shark is not working, repeat, the shark is not working. No matter where you were, and for months.
We just waited around. We just waited and waited and waited.
And I remember every day, about the 50th or 60th day of shooting, the crew would come over to me, and they'd all ask me during the day, when are we going to be done with this movie? And I would honestly say to them, with complete sympathy for the question, I don't know. I don't know when we're going to finish this movie. We could finish it if I get fired and dragged off the movie, then somebody else could come in and finish it quickly. Maybe they'll shut us down. And I remember how we got tears in our eyes when we sang the song, Show Me the Way to Go Home. I'm tired and I want to go to bed, which is sung in the film by the three principals. I remember looking around at Charlesie, the script girl, and other people on the set with tears in their eyes, not because it was a sweet, emotional scene. That had become their mantra. That's all they could think about, was what was home like. And they missed their kids, and they missed their backyards, and they missed their, their families and their lifestyles. And in a sense, that's why I always saw myself in the negative. I saw myself as James Cagney in Mr. Roberts, not letting the shore, the crew, get to shore. Now, by the way, the crew did get to shore. They got to shore every Sunday that we had off. We shot 6-day weeks, but I never left the island. And the reason I never left the island in all those 7 months of shooting on Martha's Vineyard was because if I left the island, I was certain I would never come back.
The delays in the ocean and the fact that we'd been on the island for 4 or 5 months now, we're all getting a little strange. So there was I don't know if it was a charity dinner or not, but there was a function, a splendid buffet of wonderful food.
There was this tremendous buffet of desserts, strawberry shortcake and Boston cream pies and chocolate eclairs and Napoleons and some Jell-O and also gravy and potatoes.
I'd said to Rick Fields, who was Verna Fields' son, I said, suppose there was a food fight. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, just start throwing some food.
Roy started it. Roy threw a big glob of mashed potatoes and gravy right into my face. And before I could recover and throw something at him, Richard Dreyfuss, I think, took his dessert and threw it into Roy's face. Right center, nose, eyes, mouth, the whole thing. Roy turned, he took 2 or 3 desserts, threw them at Richard. Richard ducked and it hit somebody behind him. And it was a bit of a Three Stooges brawl. I remember Dick and David got up and left right away. They saw it was coming. And in about 30 seconds, we were actually standing, hurling food at each other.
And before, it was a melee after that. Just food all over the floor, all the help that was there serving Jenna, they came out, they laughed like crazy. I don't know if some of the townspeople appreciated it as much as we did, but it was a tremendous blowing off of steam.
And then I remember Richard and Roy, covered in food, running out to the Kelly House swimming pool and diving in the water. And all this, once yummy food, like, you know, Technicolor silt rising to the surface of this otherwise turquoise pool. I remember saying, what the heck, and I jumped into and washed myself off. But I mean, that was what happens in the Navy when you just, you know, aren't given shore leave. Let that be a lesson.
The decision to continue filming Jaws was a very shaky one. Our technical people, what Steven Spielberg was fond of calling our special defects department, wanted us to stop so they could perfect it. Dick and I, battle-scarred veterans of the movie wars, knew that you never take the film out of the camera because they may never let you put it back in, particularly with a movie like this. Even if we got 1/16th of a page of script a day, you kept moving. Stephen at one point considered moving our whole crew to the Bahamas where the waters were tranquil and everything, and we weren't in favor of that. Just keep shooting. Keep shooting and make do with what you've got.
This whole system with the barrels, that kept the shark alive. I mean, when those barrels came up, the shark was there. And that really saved us. It saved us, or we'd still be there waiting for the shark to work, really.
Finally, after all this, I mean, it was maybe September, that we got the shark to raise out of the water. And, you know, and that was that one shot with the Roy Scheider, you know. And it just barely worked.
Marker. And good blood.
And action, Roy.
Slow ahead. I can go slow ahead. You ought to come down and ladle some of this shit.
And down. And cut.
And then one day, you heard this. The shark is working. Repeat, the shark is working.
The shark worked well enough that we, for a while there, had the biggest hit of all time. So I really owe the shark a lot more than I want to take away from it right now. And I owe Bob Maddy and his team a lot as well. There was the one orca, which originally was called the Warlock, was a boat that was purchased by Joe Alves, the production designer, and he chose the boat. And I liked the boat a lot, but I didn't think it didn't have enough character to it. And Joe agreed, and Joe actually replaced the entire wheelhouse with one of his own design with larger windows, because the windows were too small, and Joe and I both wanted larger windows so we could see out. So everywhere you were inside the boat, the ocean was breathing down your neck, rather than looking through a small porthole and saying, well, the ocean's sort of like that could have been a process shot. So I wanted really big windows in the wheelhouse, in the main cabin, and Joe kind of reconfigured the boat to give it a little more personality, squared off a little bit more than the original boat we bought was.
We were shooting about, I don't know, 75 yards, I'm really not sure, off the coast of Chappaquiddick Island. Robert, Roy, myself, Freddie Zendar, the boat wrangler, and an ancient sound man with a Nagra.
And what happened was we were pulling one of the barrels away from the boat. They had put a little eye hook into one of the boards just below the surface, just below the waterline, like a shiv. So the rope would go through the shiv, and it would seem to pull the barrel toward the orca, as if the shark was heading toward the orca. The problem was the motorboat went so fast, it pulled the shiv and the planking out from the hull of the orca, and of course the water rushed in.
And we started to sink. No kidding. No kidding. Water started rushing onto the boat. Freddie Zendar jumps up from the hold, cursing and screaming in Austrian, and starts to power the boat as fast as he could toward the beach of Chappaquiddick Island, hoping to be able to ground the boat before it sinks, and we have no orca. There's only one orca. In the meantime, we're in 6-foot swells, and Steven Spielberg is trying to send safety boats to get us transferred off the boat. Get the actors off the boat! Get the actors off the boat!
I remember John Carter, who won an Academy Award, by the way, for Best Sound for Jaws. He picked up the Nagra. He was on the boat and held over his head and said, the actors, save the sound department. And I had this image to this day of John sinking, holding the Nagger over his head, the water up to John's ankles, up to his knees, boat scrambling to pull everybody off the sinking Orca, and John with his Nagger going under.
There was a certain level of executive indifference to the sound department's lifespan. Get the actors off the boat!
We had lost the camera. The camera was on the boat too. It went underwater. And Bill Butler said, you know, in a sense, the developing solution we use is a saline solution. And I think this film's going to be okay if we can rush it to the lab.
We got on an airplane with a bucket of water and the film in it and took it to New York and developed it and didn't lose a foot.
That was Robert's idea. Robert Shaw, said, I've got this tooth that's fake. And he pulled his cap off and the little nub was under it. And he said, can I take that off as an addition to the scar comparing contest? The Indianapolis speech about the atomic bomb that had been taken from Tinian the Lady, which for me is my favorite part of Jaws, this speech that Shaw gives about that. That was conceived by Howard Sackler, who only really wrote a short paragraph as Quint starts to talk about one of the reasons he killed sharks today is what sharks did to him and his shipmates back in 1945. And it was a wonderful scene that I kept trying to get Howard Sackler to expand, but Howard felt shorter was better and never would elaborate on it. And one day I was talking to John Milius and I said, could you make this longer? Because I think it's a speech, not just a couple of short paragraphs. And John said, sure, I love the speech. It's a great idea. I'll try. And so John sat down and he wrote page after page in longhand, I believe, and sent me the actual original longhand version of a very, very long Quint speech, which was essentially too much, but pared down, it was going to be great. When Robert Shaw read it, Shaw, who himself had written Man in the Glass Booth, was an accomplished playwright, Shaw said, it's too hard for me to play John. There's too much John Huston in some of this dialogue. And Huston could say this, but I can't say it as well as Huston. Let me have a chance of rewriting it. So, and then Shaw rewrote Milius, who had rewritten Sackler. And the speech in the movie is basically Shaw's version of Milius' version of Sackler's version.
The final telling of the Indianapolis tale was one of the most riveting. Sometimes when you're watching another actor tell a story, you're making up your interest. When Robert told that story, I couldn't keep my eyes off it.
In both the book and the early versions of the script, Quint is harpooning the shark. His leg gets caught in the rope. He gets dragged over the side to his death where he drowns and is probably bitten too, as far as I know. He dies the way Ahab dies in Moby Dick. It always seemed to us that if Quint is going to die, he should be bitten. The best thing would be if he could go mano a mano and stab the shark, which he does. And his formidable human talents are no match for the formidable shark talents of the fish. So we chose the ending that we have in the movie, which is that he slides into the great jaws of the fish and gets chomped.
The second boat, the second Orca that was constructed was built just to sink and then pump air back in the ballast, and it would come up for take two and then sink a second time or as many times as we had to sink it. And that was, of course, for the shot where the boat starts to sink and Roy Scheider has to climb out the flipping window and climb the mast as the boat goes down, and he only has one final opportunity to succeed.
The most interesting conflict, as far as I'm concerned, happened between me and Stephen when it came to the discussion of the ending. Because he said to me, the ending of the book is a downer. The shark gets stabbed with a harpoon, can't hold up the barrels, and eventually drowns, spins slowly to the bottom, and the movie or the book, the story ends, if you will. The characters are saved. That is not a big, rousing ending, and I need a big, rousing ending. So he said, here is what I propose to do. And he told me the ending that he had in mind. And I said, Stephen, that is completely unbelievable. It can't happen. A shark does not bite down on a scuba tank and explode like an oil refinery. He said, I don't care. He said, if I have got them for 2 hours, they will believe whatever I do for the next 3 minutes because I've got them in my hands and I want the audience on their feet screaming at the end, yes, 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 this is what should happen to this animal, which reminded me in retrospect of the Bill Goldman thing, which is that reality may be great and truth may be wonderful, but none of it holds a candle to believability. And if the filmmaker has done his job and brought you into believability, he can do anything. Play by the rules. Set the rules, but follow the rules. And that's exactly what Stephen did. He was right. I was wrong in this entire argument, which was that his ending brought people to their feet screaming, yes, 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 this is the way it should be. And it may be incredible, but it was the right thing to do.
In Duel, you hear the sound of, in fact, it was a dinosaur growling from an old bee dinosaur picture when the truck went over the cliff, because I'd always imagined the truck to be a bit like a T-Rex chasing a car. And I used the very same sound effect in Jaws, almost as a bit of just a reminder that there was a kinship between both stories, as the shark is sinking to the bottom of the ocean after it's been exploded by the compressed air.
One of the great pieces of Spielbergian genius was the fact that at the end of the movie Jaws, the Richard Dreyfuss character pops up and they swim to shore together. This brought cheers, of course. It was what the audience wanted.
When I finally did leave the island, just before the last shot, which was the blowing up of the shark, I left the island for two reasons. One, I heard the crew wanted to throw me overboard. I didn't know whether they were going to throw me overboard in cement slippers or throw me overboard via the poop deck, one bounce and then into the water, or whether it was going to be just, into the water with a 2-foot sandy bottom. I didn't know what they were going to do to me, so I thought I'd get out of there quickly. And I remember when I got to Boston on the ferry, we spent the night in Boston, and the next day we were scheduled, Dreyfuss and I, to fly back to Los Angeles on American Airlines. And I vividly recall getting into my hotel room and having a complete anxiety breakdown. I mean, it's a complete, I don't know what you would call it, it was a breakdown. I mean, I couldn't stop shaking. My jaw was clenched. I couldn't open my mouth. I was getting electrical shocks through my brain, like I was having seizures or something. And I know this sounds like really melodramatic, but it's exactly what happened. You know, something neurological, emotional, something was happening to me, and it was a full, panic attack, which I, don't remember ever having at that level before. And I remember calling Richard up, and he was down in the pub downstairs, and Richard came up with me. And I just said, I'm in really bad shape, Ricky. And Rick said, well, don't worry, we'll be on the airplane tomorrow, which we were.
My recollection is that we showed the film, a cut version of the film, with one big sequence missing, without Johnny Williams' music, in a projection room at Universal Studios. And when the lights went on, there was no reaction at all, as I recall. And I recall turning around and saying, well, Sid, what do you think? He said, it's okay. Well, okay was like being given 1/2 a star. Okay for 159 days? Well, of course it was only okay. It didn't have Johnny Williams' music. It didn't have some major underwater stuff that we filmed in the tank at MGM Studios. In order to get very close angles underwater, we couldn't get the waters of Martha Vineyard, both cold and murky, wouldn't allow us to do much underwater stuff. Metro had this great Esther Williams tank, as it used to be called. So the reaction was, go get the rest of the movie.
Well, when they came back from Martha's Vineyard, they realized that they didn't have the footage, as I understood it, that they needed of Hooper and the shark together in the cage. And I went in and we went down to Culver City to MGM Studios and shot it in a tank down there.
Here's your best at. You're moving the one on the stand now.
There were 3 intercuts for the sequence for the shark attacks the cage. The one, of course, was Dick Warlock, who was the stunt person inside the cage, subbing for Richard Dreyfuss. The second was the Rizzo Shoot with Ron and Val in Australia. And there was Frank Sparks, whose eyes I actually used to substitute for Richard Dreyfuss's eyes because Richard was unavailable and was shooting the inserts. So when you see the Richard Dreyfuss scream, that's not Richard's face. Those aren't Richard's eyes. That's the guy named Sparks.
Down in the tank was a metal apparatus that the shark was attached to, where it could move forward and backward, sideways, up and down. So it had pretty good movement, real natural movement, you know, and it was operated by a special effects man. His name is Whitey Crum. As Whitey was looking in one window, watching the shark from the side with the controls, Mr. Spielberg was around the other side, or a quarter of the way around, looking at it from another perspective. He was looking at the shark coming directly at the cage.
No, bring it out now. Bring it out. Bring it out. Okay, attack. Attack. Oh, cut. Once again, right away. Yeah, next time, okay?
The first test of Jaws took place, as I wrote in my own book, in Dallas in a shopping center. And Dick Zanuck and I were extremely nervous. Would the shark get laughs? Everybody knew, read a newspaper, that it was not a real shark. What would happen? And I remember circling around that theater, and we noticed a crowd. Of course, we weren't very subtle with what was put on the marquee. It was something like The Biggest Fish Story You'll Ever See, or something very clever that attracted attention. After all, Jaws was the #1 bestseller and had a lot of media attention. And so we went and had a very stiff drink. We went into the theater, and the screams started, and they never stopped. And we were pinching each other. It was incredible.
I thought the whole roof ceiling of the theater was going to collapse because the noise, the shock, and the scream was so loud, and it didn't die down, so that you couldn't literally hear the dialogue for the next, maybe minute, because people were screaming repeatedly, and there was such excitement in the theater. I remember elbowing Mr. Brown, who was sitting next to me, and he was elbowing me back and said, "We're in, we did it." We knew with that first scream that it had worked.
When the shark came out of the water, when Roy Scheider was chumming and said, "Why don't you come down and chum some of this shit?" The shark comes out. I had designed, hopefully, a laugh that would turn into a scream. So I used the word shit. I added that line because in those days, back in 1974, the word shit was an easy laugh. Now it's used so much, nobody laughs anymore. But then it wasn't used that much. And it instantly got a nervous laugh from audiences, often an embarrassed laugh, and with younger people, kind of a rebellious laugh. And I was trying to change a laugh, ramping up into a scream, and it worked. It was my proudest moment at the whole preview. They laughed when they heard the word shit, and when the shark came out, that laugh sustained itself into a humongous scream, and popcorn went flying. And it was amazing. And it made me greedy. I got so greedy. Because earlier in the movie, when they find Ben Gardner's head in the boat, I hadn't timed it right, and Richard turns around, this where the head's already there, and there was no reaction from the audience at all. And so I was kind of scratching my head after the preview, and I was really extraordinarily happy. The numbers were the highest numbers in Universal's history, and the executives were all happy. We were all happy. The audience loved the picture. And I was greedy. I said, there's one more scream we can get in this movie if I can figure out the thing with Ben Gardner's head. So, because the studio wouldn't give me any more money, even though they were ecstatic, they said, it's fine. Don't fix something that's not broken. The movie works. Don't mess with it, or you'll improve this into a failure. So I went and spent $3,000 of my own money to have some art department people build a balsa wood side of a boat to match the Ben Gardner boat we had shot before, cut a hole in it, and got the same Ben Gardner head, the styrofoam head, latex and styrofoam, and had it underwater. And this time, simply, when the double for Rick came to the hole, I did several timings. I shot it about 9 different ways. One time I shot it, he comes to the hole, and the head comes out. Another time, he comes with a hole and the head comes out at the same time. Another time, the head comes out and he's not even in the shot. Another time, the camera goes really close to the knife, taking the tooth out, and the head comes out there. I did it a whole bunch of different ways. And then I went to the dubbing room where we were already, remixing little changes we had made. And I cut it in, and I tried it out on all of the sound effects editors and music editors and the dubbers. And I showed them one way, and they kind of said, that's interesting. It's better than what you had. Another way, no reaction. And then one way, nobody screamed, but they all kind of just like suddenly said, oh yeah, wow, that surprised me. I didn't expect it. It was simply a matter of timing. And the moment that works the best, which is the moment in the movie that the dubbers reacted to, is the moment where he gets to the hole and then the head comes out. It was just a bit of a pause. And I just remember we then took the film to Long Beach, at the Lakewood theaters. And we had a second preview there with that extra scene, that extra moment in. And it got a humongous scream, bigger than the scream in Dallas when the shark came out of the water with Roy Chumming. And popcorn flew even higher, and people came out of their seats even higher. And I was thrilled until at Lakewood, we got to the scene that got the previous big laugh where the shark comes out of the water when Roy's chumming. And I got a big scream, but it was only 50% or less of the scream we got in Dallas. So when that preview, which is a smash preview, the scores are higher, the studio is flying on cloud nine, that they're going to make a fortune with the movie, they keep saying. And I'm scratching my head thinking, now, what did I do to make that second scream less? And I realized it was a no-brainer. The audience didn't trust me after the first scream at the end of the first act. And they were surprised, and then they were looking out for shadows and things coming out from behind things, and they were defensive and ready for some kind of a shock.
The rating of Jaws was a real cliffhanger. Richard Hefner, the chairman of the rating board of the Motion Picture Association of America, that tells parents what to expect on movies. It was essential from the standpoint of MCA Universal, financiers, and distributors that Jaws get a PG rating, meaning parental guidance indicated, but it meant that children could come and see it.
Whatever the ratings board said to Scheinberg and Wasserman, they told Dick and David, who came to me as my producers, and said, Stephen, in order to get not an R rating, but a PG rating, you need to cut some frames from the leg coming down. And I was happy to do it because they didn't ask me to cut the leg out. They just asked me not to let the leg hit, bounce, gush blood, settle, because I was really sort of studying it. So I cut it about 1.5 to 2 feet off that shot. You just see the leg come into frame. Just when you see it severed, and it just starts to hit the silt bed, we cut away.
And finally, a PG was awarded. Our argument was very simple with Hefner and his board. Nobody impersonates a shark, unlike films of violence. No one is going to go get up and eat somebody. Nobody's going to drag someone down in the water. What happens in nature is part of childhood's experience. Anyone who's read Grimm's fairy tales, Red Riding Hood, Little Red Riding Hood is one of the scariest stories ever written. And children are regularly terrified. After the film was distributed, I don't recall any letters from children about children having bad dreams. I had many about adults having bad dreams and never going by the water again. And so the rating, to the great relief of MCA Universal, was, in my estimation, rightly given. Parental guidance may be too intense for some children, was on the ads. Of course, all that did was bring them in.
I saw the film in its final version when it played at the Rivoli Theater in Manhattan, which was a huge theater with a great big screen. And the members of my family and guests were invited. And watching the audience react to it was wonderfully exciting. I mean, they just laughed and they screamed, and they did everything that we hoped they would do.
I happened by coincidence to be sitting next to the Newsweek researcher who was sitting next to the Time researcher. And at the moment when Roy turns aft, and the shark comes out of the water, and he utters that great line that, again, I wish I'd written, called, I think you're going to need a bigger boat. The Newsweek researcher jumped out of her chair and landed on the upturned pen of the Time researcher, thus having a double screamer going. And I thought right then we have a fairly successful movie going on here.
There was applause at the end of the movie. The movie ends, we're swimming away, it says the end, and they went crackers. Everyone went berserk. However many people are in that theater, and I couldn't even tell you. Pretty big theater. They went nuts. And then they sat, and they watched all of the credits. Every last one of them. And nobody moved. And then they applauded again. And I've never seen that.
And I remember walking out on the sidewalk at the end of it, and I looked at Dreyfuss, and he looked at me, and he ran over, and he jumped up in my arms, and he said, "We're sensational. We're great. We're terrific." And I said, yeah.
At the end of that evening, I walked out, and I ran into Dreyfuss in the street, and we went to a bar, and all Rick could say was, "He did it, he did it, he did it." And I said, "Who did it? What are you talking about?" He said, "Spielberg did it, he did it."
It was a hell of a moment. I felt so proud that I was in that movie, and so proud for Spielberg. And I remember getting on the phone with notes saying, "And you gotta do this, and you gotta do that." And he was very pleased.